The release of Doom in 1993 changed the industry forever. It was not the only FPS in town, mind you, but it was arguably the most important one. Its speed, precision, and design all turned heads. And that includes publishers, because in its wake, another battle ensued. The Clone Wars, the Doom Clone Wars, as it was often referred. That period when developers scrambled to bring their own visions to life in first person. Some were successful, others perhaps less so, but it was an exciting time all the same. Star Wars Dark Forces is one such game. Created by LucasArts during their heyday, Dark Forces is rooted in a genre that plays unlike anything else LucasArts had released, but their unique vision for this game led to it becoming one of the most interesting and inspired Doom-adjacent shooters of its day. And now, thanks to Nightdive Studios, Dark Forces has re-emerged from its DOS prison, gracing all modern platforms thanks to this new remastered edition of the game. Boasting new high-resolution assets, key gameplay improvements, and previously unreleased content, I was certainly eager to see how it would fare on new machines. So today, I'll talk about what makes this game interesting in the first place, then we'll dig into the remastered version to see how it's changed and improved. We'll talk about the visuals, the gameplay, controls, and even the sound. So, let's get into it. When Dark Forces released in early 1995, it occupied an unusual place in LucasArts' lineup. Having mostly focused its effort on point-and-click adventures, LucasArts had little experience in the action genre. And despite their association with Lucasfilm, the studio had produced very few Star Wars-related games. So in that sense, Dark Forces feels like a departure, combining both first-person shooting and Star Wars into a singular whole. And what a combo it is! Star Wars appropriate weapons feel fantastic in first person, and the themes lend themselves perfectly to the genre. But it's the surrounding package that truly elevates it. You see, most shooters released between Doom and Dark Forces focused primarily on the action. You run through a level, you kill everything, and then you exit, before doing it again. There were outliers, of course, such as System Shock, but the genre itself was fairly limited at this point. Dark Forces succeeds by fusing solid first-person action with the storytelling and visual design prowess you expect from LucasArts. Specifically, Dark Forces features beautifully designed, fully voiced cutscenes between missions, introducing characters and motivations for the player.
This contemptible excuse for an officer will no longer divulge any more information to that rebel, Kyle Katarn.
Katarn will not be as easy to deal with. He is very resourceful.
In addition to focusing on real mission objectives, it was not just about reaching the exit. Instead, you were asked to perform specific tasks and actions, then get yourself to an extraction point. It had a real sense of place that barely existed in comparable mid-90s shooters, and these elements worked in tandem to provide something truly special. Yet despite its success and popularity, not to mention the multiple excellent sequels, Dark Forces remained exclusive to its somewhat confined roots. Until now, official versions existed only for DOS, macOS, and the original PlayStation. But now, thanks to Nightdive, Dark Forces has become playable on all new machines, including PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, modern PCs, and even stuff like the Steam Deck. Nightdive has crafted this new version of Dark Forces in the Kex engine, using the original game's source code. But in that original form, Dark Forces was built using an in-house sector-based engine known as Jedi. This engine began development in July 1993, months before Doom would ship, and the development team at the time had little idea where it would lead them. Upon release, however, it's clear that they accomplished something impressive. The game was widely praised for its gameplay, visual direction, and storytelling, among other things. This Jedi engine was capable of features that few others could match as of early 1995 when Dark Forces shipped. While it was still sector-based like Doom, Jedi enabled the developers to produce levels that would have been impossible in the Doom engine at the time. For starters, they could now design overlapping structures. That means rooms above rooms, bridges, and more were all possible in Dark Forces. This allowed the level designers to create more complex spaces than would be feasible in the original Doom. The one limitation is that No two spaces could appear simultaneously. You couldn't look into two different floors at once. But this feature would be added to Outlaws, the second game powered by the Jedi engine. Oh, and while we're here, this room highlights something cool. Laser blasts ricochet off the walls in this level. So you'll need to use a little more caution, and it just creates a cool, chaotic situation. One of those nice touches. You can experience this immediately in the first level. The original development team poured a lot of effort into creating structures that feel architecturally feasible, and this requires overlapping rooms. For instance, as we enter this area to the left, you'll note this large silver cylinder. You can freely walk around this cylinder, but if you go back out into the main hallway, there's a small elevator that you can unlock using the red key card. Take this up and you'll find that familiar cylinder, only you're able to walk around on top of the room you were just in. So you continue, hit the button, and then we make our way down these stairs. Here we enter the basement area, and this is where the Death Star plans are located. The thing is, this basement runs beneath the rest of the stage, something you really could not achieve in something like the Doom engine. Then as we make our way out, we climb into this elevator, which just happens to be that same metallic cylinder we observed earlier, highlighting their focus on architectural feasibility. The level finishes up with this landing pad, which runs on top of the rest of the level. Again, it's another room above a room, something that becomes even more evident when you open this air duct over here, which leads back to the level's starting point. The key is, the Jedi engine allowed for an impressive level of sophistication in terms of map design that was extremely rare as of 1995. Something like Descent with its true 3D engine could accomplish similar feats, mind you, but it had its own limitations as well. LucasArts did an amazing job here. Then we come to special effects. The Jedi engine is capable of things like diminished lighting that we saw in Doom, but Dark Forces also allows for other nifty things such as this thick red fog visible in the mining stage. The team was also able to change the entire light levels on the fly to simulate dynamic lighting. In this darkened tavern, for instance, firing your blaster momentarily illuminates the entire scene to striking effect. Dark Forces also allows players to look up and down, which really hadn't been seen before in a sector-based engine, and allows for simplistic 3D objects such as Kyle's ship, where you can see it swooping down in between missions, along with certain key objectives and environmental hazards. Plus this Death Star diagram, how cool is that? On top of all this, Dark Forces could run at a full 70 frames per second using DOS Mode X. Doom in comparison was capped at just 35 frames per second, which is half of 70 Hz. So on a powerful 486 or Pentium based PC, Dark Forces felt significantly smoother to play than Doom. Beyond that, Dark Forces was also imbued with LucasArts' proprietary iMuse system, which allows for fully dynamic MIDI music playback that adjusts to your actions as you play. It was truly revolutionary when it was first introduced, and Dark Forces makes great use of it. Now, the thing here is that the Doom engine, which we've been comparing it to, was already ahead of most of the competition during this era, especially when it was released in '93. Throughout 1994, there were still games being made using or derived from the Wolfenstein engine. So, for Dark Forces to swoop in with such capabilities, enough to rival and exceed the Doom engine in some areas, it says a lot about the stellar work performed on this project. Only with the arrival of Ken Silverman's build engine, arguably, did we see a further evolution of sector-based rendering in first-person shooters. Years later, Dark Forces was even ported to the Sony PlayStation, and this version seems to use that original Jedi engine. However, it doesn't really seem to fit with the PlayStation's graphics processor, and likely the entire game is run on the CPU. On one hand, this means somewhat sluggish performance, but on the other, this game manages to avoid texture warping, which plagued most other games in the system. It's not an amazing version of Dark Forces or anything, but until now it was really the only official console release of the game. Which brings us back to Dark Forces Remastered. This is not the first attempt at reverse engineering Dark Forces. The Force engine already exists and has its own slew of features which are impressive. but this new Nightdive version takes things to the next level. The big difference here lies in the production around the game itself, specifically the creation of new assets and improvements. This is not just a basic port. Every inch of the game's artwork has received a complete revamp. Whether we're talking about the weapon sprites, the enemy characters, world textures, cutscenes, or anything else, all of it has been recreated in high resolution. Now it still retains the pixel art aesthetic, but it sees such a dramatic increase in resolution that it feels much more fitting and beautiful on a modern display. I think it looks gorgeous and stands among the best work Nightdive has ever done in this space, truly. When you gaze upon those new skyboxes, for instance, you'll instantly recognize each one from the original game, but they're now presented with so much more detail. It feels like a true love letter to the original art design. The team has also remade each of the game's cutscenes in high resolution, including re-rendering out the 3D rendered sequences entirely. This isn't just a case of AI upscaling the old cutscenes and calling it a day. No, they went the extra mile to create brand new assets while closely mimicking the original look. It's truly remarkable. Now, I still love those original cutscenes, but the new ones absolutely shine. Thankfully, if you do prefer the look and feel of the original release, they've also added the option to toggle between the enhanced hardware-accelerated visuals and the original low-resolution graphics, which feel very accurate to play in the game on a real MS-DOS PC in terms of visual presentation. So I feel like that original experience has been nicely preserved here. The key is that in both modes, Nightdive has done a superlative job in replicating that original Dark Forces experience right down to the smallest detail. Everything from that original game has been matched, both visually and gameplay-wise. Crucially, however, this remastered version of Dark Forces is available across a wide range of platforms, including Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, and the PC. And when it comes to visuals, there is little to distinguish them. Naturally, console versions such as the Switch are limited to 1080p output at the max, but the display capabilities of each machine are fully taken advantage of, it seems. On the new machines, the one exception to this is the Series S, which maxes out at 1080p currently. But hey, at least the Series S, Series X, and PS5 versions all support 120 frames per second playback, but more on performance shortly. More importantly, every version controls like a dream. In particular, the gamepad implementation here is superb. It feels unbelievably precise and responsive in a way that we don't often see, making it an absolute joy to play with a gamepad. Switch and PlayStation also receive support for gyro aiming. If you're a fan of it, you're going to be well served here. For me though, the PC version is my favorite of the bunch, with the option for ultra high frame rates and full access to the game's built-in console, which turns out to be somewhat necessary as a result of one particular nitpick as it relates to performance. So, okay, if you recall early in the video I mentioned that the game runs at 70 frames per second in DOS. This looks great on an actual CRT, but it's an issue with Dark Forces when trying to pair it with a display that does not support this refresh rate. That means if you're running at, say, 60 Hz, the 70 Hz refresh rate does not divide evenly into this value, which leads to judder. Problem is, I immediately noticed this same behavior in the new remastered version of the game across every single platform, so I had to investigate. Asking the team at Nightdive about this, it turns out that Dark Forces in its original DOS form, deep in the source code, has an internal tick rate of 145.65. This value determines the speed at which everything within the game operates. Set this value too low and the game will run in basically slow motion. The inverse is true if you set it too high. So for the remastered version, the default value was rounded off to an even 144, which means if you play on a PC with a 144Hz monitor, you won't have this issue at all. It'll look perfect. Conversely, if you have a Steam Deck OLED, by limiting the system to 72Hz using SteamOS's limiting feature, the game also runs flawlessly. Unfortunately, neither of these values play nicely with other common refresh rates such as 60Hz or 120Hz. So when playing Dark Forces on such a display, you'll notice judder like every other version of the game. But here's the thing, on the PC at least, the user has some control over this behavior. By adjusting the CL_engine hertz command line variable to, say, 120, I was able to run the game at either 60 or 120 Hz with zero judder. The knock-on effect is that gameplay speed is slightly reduced from the default 144, but personally, I didn't find this bothersome at all as the game is already very fast, and it's certainly preferable to judder. It's one of those little things that couldn't really be changed without breaking the game entirely, and Nightdive chose to remain faithful to the original gameplay speed. Fortunately, the higher the frame rate, the less you'll notice the judder, and that's where the good news comes in. The more powerful consoles offer support for 120 frames per second gameplay, and it does feel great. Most people likely won't be bothered by the judder issues when playing at 120. Now at 60 Hz, I think it's more noticeable, but at least these consoles deliver a completely steady 60 FPS, so the only sort of perceptual issues in the frame rate comes down to the refresh rate mismatch. What I'd like to see is the option to cap the frame rate at 72 Hz like the Steam Deck OLED, while relying on VRR to provide smooth frame delivery. This would only work when outputting 120 frames per second with VRR, of course, but I think it would work great. Alas, when it comes to the Switch version, things are a little worse for the wear. Basically, there are performance dips on Switch, primarily when engaged in combat. As you can see, the frame rate starts to slip as soon as we engage the enemy, and this is compounded with the judder, leading to an experience that feels decidedly less smooth than other versions of the game. But here's a little trick. If you play in software mode using the original graphics, the performance becomes super smooth, locking to 60. But you didn't get the remaster to play in this mode, I'd imagine. Thankfully, there is a way to slightly improve things, and that's by disabling the anti-aliasing option here in the menu. This does boost performance slightly in the remastered mode. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than using AA. So what's going on here? Well, I asked Sam from Nightdive about this problem, and there's good news. He's already fixed it, and the game should be patched soon. According to Sam, there were two issues that he needed to address. Firstly, a bad scissor rect, and secondly, frequent texture uploads thanks to the HUD being one large texture that is constantly modified. Together, this was just enough to drop the frame rate. So while it is disappointing that the issue is present on day one, at least it seems it will be sorted relatively soon. So in its current form, the Switch version of Dark Forces Remastered seems to be the only one with any genuine performance hiccups, and that should be addressed soon. All other versions run without issue. The only real drawback remains the aforementioned judder problem, resulting from the game's internal tick rate. What I'm curious about is whether most people will even notice the mild judders caused by the refresh rate mismatch, so be sure to let us know in the comments. You can kind of see the issue here as I spin the camera in place. Does it look fine to you, or do you notice the issue? Regardless, there's not much that could have been done here due to the nature of how Dark Forces works. Speaking of how the game works though, I want to talk about the audio next. Firstly, you have two options in the menu, General MIDI or OPL3. These simulate either a wavetable style sound card or FM synth that was common in the Sound Blaster cards back in the day. It's a great option to see. However, there's one minor issue here. The original game relies on LucasArts' iMuse system, and as I noted earlier, this system is tricky. As a result, the music note timing is slightly off in the remastered version. So listen to this comparison between the Nightdive version using General MIDI and the PC original using a real Roland Sound Canvas sound module. They do use different sound fonts, sure, so the sound is slightly different, but the main difference lies in the timing of the notes. Let's go ahead and bring in a couple other comparison points. The OPL3 option in the remaster, and a Sound Blaster AW32 wavetable. I think it sounds okay enough during the gameplay, but there is this feeling that the note timing is still slightly off, especially when using the general MIDI version. Still, I was curious about why this was happening, so I inquired with the development team, and they told me the following.
iMuse timing is a matter we can try to look into. Part of the issue with the timing is that iMuse originally used the programmable PC timer where you could assume that things would fire off at a particular speed perfectly. We worked off the Force Engine's code as we lacked the full source to the original iMuse and had to change the TFE's code to work with how Kex streams audio for music.
This is a tricky one then. iMuse itself is delicate like a fine watch, so I can understand the troubles experienced in implementing it. After all, the easier solution would have been to rely on pre-recorded music, but then you'd lose the dynamic soundtrack, so I think they made the right choice here even if it's not perfect. As it stands though, I kind of prefer playing with the OPL3 version of the soundtrack. It's noticeably less realistic, but it successfully captures the soundscape you'd expect from a Sound Blaster card. So while the tick rate and music timing issues are indeed disappointing, I still feel that the overall experience and package is solid. It's ultimately better than any other option for playing Dark Forces, and that includes the Force Engine, which exhibits all the same limitations but without the remastered assets and other quality of life features. Dark Forces Remastered also includes a range of bonus content for players to explore, including a pre-release demo map that was only shared at CES prior to release. Images of this map were presented in pre-release media, but the level itself never appeared in the final game, only small pieces of it. Now you can experience this entire stage in the remastered version, which is excellent. What I'll be curious about now though is how well new players adapt to Dark Forces as a whole. You see, Doom is timeless, but not every shooter from this era holds up quite as well. Dark Forces, I think, largely sits closer to Doom. It's very enjoyable and playable today, but the map design itself, with its realistic focus, can sometimes feel overwhelming or even confusing. The remaster certainly helps due to its high-resolution support, but Dark Forces is not a simple game. You'll need to go in there with a keen eye for detail if you want to get through every stage. And I would recommend doing so, as this is an interesting game to experience even in the modern era, and it serves as a strong reminder of LucasArts' importance in this industry. But we're going to leave it there for now, so hopefully you enjoyed this dive back into the world of Dark Forces, and we'll see you next time.